So, we are back at it again with more Montreal Canadiens trade ideas, and today we are heading over to a video segment that was published on the... Okay, no, not the... La Poche Bleue podcast. Podcast? Radio show. Podcast, yeah. Pretty sure most of y'all are familiar with La Poche Bleue. I'm gonna start pronouncing it like that because I'm bad at French. Anyways, I like this podcast because even though I can't really understand much of French, one of the hosts is former Montreal Canadien and Vancouver Canuck, Maxim Lapierre. Pretty sure that for Vancouver fans taking a look at this, you're like, oh, it's Lapierre, great. That's why I use the Canucks version of Lapierre in the thumbnail, because he is such an iconic figure in Canucks lore. I get it that he had a longer time with Montreal, but man, that Game 5 Stanley Cup Finals 1-0 game-winning goal against Tim Thomas in the third period will always be a memorable moment in my hockey fandom life. Anyways, Maxim Lapierre had himself a decent NHL career as an agitator and a clutch Stanley Cup Finals goal scorer, but he also has this podcast now. And alongside the crew at La Poche Bleue, they had themselves a video segment earlier last week that talks about whom it is the Montreal Canadiens could trade next. I'll leave a link in the description to this video clip, although the text of the video post is very self-explanatory. Christian Dvorak, le premier joueur échangé par les Canadiens, and it says here, is Christian Dvorak going to be the first player traded by the Habs? The quote from Lapierre reads this: "It should be Dvorak, in my opinion. If he doesn't bring more to the team, and if he doesn't show more progress on the ice, he'll have to go." The quote, by the way, is from an article at HabsFanatics.com. Leave a link in the description of that too. And for Christian Dvorak, it's interesting to talk about the idea of him getting traded once again, because we always seem to do this. It's like a commonly recurring thing on this channel. And the problem with that is, this has been a commonly recurring thing for months, even before the 2024-2025 season began for the Montreal Canadiens, and the reason that's noteworthy is because there have been so many extra guys added onto the Montreal Canadiens forward roster, guys that we didn't really expect to make the team in any significant capacity, guys who really showed off well during the preseason, prospects that are slowly bleeding onto the team. Christian Dvorak is one of many on the Montreal Canadiens' middle to bottom six, and that middle to bottom six is just getting more crowded with appropriate names. You have the guys that didn't even make it full-time on the team. The Alex Barré-Boulets, who had themselves a cup of coffee in the regular season but then got sent down. You have the Josh Waz, who were playing decently well in the preseason but didn't do enough to stick around. You have the guys that did stick around and who are actually playing really well. Emil Heineman, Oliver Kapanen. And then you have the extras that aren't even available right now. Guys like Raphael Harvey-Pinard, guys like Patrick Laine, and maybe even Ivan Demidov. The point is, the Montreal Canadiens forward core from last year to this year, it features a lot more competition. And before we even saw this competition go down, there were already conversations about Christian Dvorak potentially being some sort of a trade chip, because another team in the NHL might want a middle to bottom six caliber defensively minded center, and Dvorak could just do that. Now, Dvorak this season has 1 point in 6 games played. It's an assist. 1 assist, it's the entirety of his production this season. He's been declining in point production ever since his first year in Montreal in 21-22. 33 points in the shortened 56-game campaign that year, but then it dipped to 28 points in more games, and then he had 9 points in 30 games last year, and he was injured for most of it, so it's not really fair to bring his name up. But a lot of Canadiens fans were already thinking in the summer of this year, hey, if it's Doc, if it's Suzuki, if these guys are your top 2 centers, and you have Jake Evans or Owen Beck or anybody else, or even Michael Hage in the long term as a guy that could be a middle to bottom 6 center, do you really need Dvorak? He's kind of expensive, isn't he? Now, the Habs have themselves guys that can play center. If you wanted to force Oliver Kapanen to do that, he can do that. There's a lot going on here with the Montreal Canadiens. Heck, even Alex Newhook could play center if you really wanted him to. He developed in the BCHL's Victoria Grizzlies as a center, so he's got that capability too. Christian Dvorak, sorry buddy, you're role, your profile, it's just not really needed anymore. So for Maxim Lapierre to speak out about this on the podcast, yeah, it makes sense. I kind of agree with the idea here. Nobody's necessarily disagreeing with it. I think for Christian Dvorak, you're ultimately just going to have to decide whether or not the value he brings to the team is worth keeping around. Is his veteran presence, because I guess we can say he's a veteran now, he's 28 years old for crying out loud, is that veteran presence valued in the room, and is there tangible hockey in his game that makes the Canadiens better that you wouldn't be willing to sacrifice? Like, oh, if you can replace his minutes with somebody else and they can do the job just as well for a cheaper cap hit, then you kind of have to make the trade, right? Christian Dvorak, over the past few games here, has averaged around 13-ish minutes time on ice. It's skewed by a 10-minute game against the LA Kings and then a 16-minute game against the Islanders, so his ice time hasn't really been too crazy. He's been roughly stabilized in the 12-13-minute mark. Is it worth it to have that kind of a guy making $4.45 million a year? I get it, it's the last year of the contract, but if the Canadiens really wanted to commit to the bit, then trade Dvorak at the deadline, or whenever it is that you want, get yourselves an extra pick or an extra prospect, or maybe even another roster player that just happens to be younger. Get anybody that can give value longer term, or that can still develop more, because when Dvorak was acquired from Arizona, it was in retaliation to the Jesperi Kotkaniemi situation. So back then he was 25, and there was still this reasonable idea that he could be a middle to top six center instead of a bottom six guy, and then he wasn't. Then the Habs went out there and did all these moves. Okay, they got Doc now. Great. He's going to be the second line center. Now they have Oliver Kapanen. Great, they always had Jake Evans, he was always going to be in the mix there, but for Christian Dvorak, with so many other centers knocking on Kent Hughes' door long-term, Michael Hage can be something, Owen Beck can be something. Not to mention some of the guys in the AHL too. There's a lot of competition here, and guys that you could say are more worth investing your time into in the next little while here. Heck, even if you traded Dvorak away right now, I don't think the Canadiens necessarily get too much worse, don't they? Like, what is Christian Dvorak's role on the team right now? He's just kind of a guy. He's one of the guyest guys that has guyed for the Montreal Canadiens the past few years. Like, you know, exactly what I'm talking about. Guys that are just there. They don't really do much. And while they're not necessarily bad, like, I don't want to say he's a bad player, he's just kind of there. I don't know, man. There's not really too much else to say about him, and I think this is the umpteenth time we've made a video going over the idea of a Dvorak trade. My question is, though, if the Montreal Canadiens can't get this guy in a valuable spot on their team, what team is really going to pay to take this guy on? Like, I don't know, if a team really thinks that he's a valuable addition to their playoff hopes, then maybe a 50% salary retained for a 4th or a 3rd round pick deal kind of gets it done. I don't know, you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Maxim Lapierre's comments and Christian Dvorak as a hockey player. Do you think he's worth trading? Do you think it's actually possible? Thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.